It was impossible for Clive to believe what was happening. Adding insult to injury, they only made matters worse. His only desire was to eat his favorite burger. In spite of everything he had been through, they denied him that right. His suffering was already too great. Is there a reason why they were doing this? Although he demanded answers, his demeanor was interpreted as threatening. As a result, the situation only worsened. Even after the fast food worker informed him that security had been called, Clive still didn't understand what was happening. A man carrying a baton entered the establishment. He couldn't believe it. The only option he had was to surrender. His old training kicked in, but he had to fight it. The reason they were doing this, however, remained a mystery to him. The only thing Clive wanted to know was why he had been asked to leave. Is there a reason why they were unwilling to serve him a meal that he so desperately needed? The fast food worker was begged to at least explain why. Her name tag read Rebecca. "Please tell me why you're doing this," he said. Looking up at him, she simply said, "It's your necklace. You can't wear that here." Clive glanced at the pendant he wore around his neck. After nearly 20 years of wearing it, it seems to be a problem now. Her lack of understanding of the necklace filled him with anger. The only option he had was to let security escort him out. Still, he wasn't finished with her or with the restaurant. He was going to reveal his true identity to them. Clive had already made up his mind about what he was going to do the next day. They needed to know who they were dealing with. The old uniform was dusted off and he put it back on. Keeping the necklace on, he waltzed back into the store. As soon as the woman behind the counter saw his uniform, she went pale. It took just 2 words for Clive to make her beg for forgiveness. As he reflected on his life, Clive Thompson was mostly proud. In the name of what was right, he loved, lost, and suffered more than most. Though he knew he had been dealt a bad hand, he always tried to look on the bright side of things. In order to make ends meet, the 60-year-old man worked odd jobs. He had been promised a pension by the government, but he never received it. As a 21-year-old, Thompson decided to do the right thing. He enrolled in the U.S. Army and was promised to be compensated upon his return. When the Vietnam War came to its end, he saw it for what it truly was. Having been tortured for years, he finally returned home. However, things wouldn't be the same as he remembered. Promises made to Clive turned out to be lies. After returning home, his support was lacking, and he even struggled to find employment because of anti-war sentiments. It was difficult to find employers who were willing to hire veterans. Despite his best efforts, Clive struggled to find decent jobs over the next 35 years. However, things were about to get even worse. Like any other day, Clive was working an odd job. For helping him move his couch, someone had agreed to pay him a tidy sum. The man helped him move it across town, using his pickup truck. As soon as that was done, the client gave Clive his money. With enough money for his month's rent and perhaps even a snack, he smiled. While deciding what to do next, Clive played with his necklace absent-mindedly. He was the only one who knew the significance of the amulet around his neck. It would never be given up willingly by him. His stomach growled at that moment. It was already late, and he hadn't even had lunch yet. The next step was obvious to him. In the end, it was his growling belly that decided the matter. There was no food in his small apartment because he hadn't gone shopping yet. In the end, he decided to take the simplest route possible. He would get something simple from a fast food restaurant. By entering the store, he had no idea what awaited him. While walking along the pavement, Clive stared at all the restaurants he passed. There wasn't anything fancy he wanted. It was then that he caught a whiff of something heavenly. The smell led him to a small burger joint. Apparently, they had delicious burgers at this fast food restaurant. Judging by the smell, the thought of eating that for lunch made his mouth water. Clive felt the money in his pocket. For the work he just did, he deserved a treat. Before walking into the fast food restaurant, he rationalized it in any way he could. He stepped inside and found it to be fairly quiet. Greeting the security guard, he walked up to the counter. Even before he could place an order, he was stunned by what he heard. In spite of the customer's hunger, the woman behind the counter paid no attention to him, as she chewed bubble gum and played some kind of game on her phone. "Hello there," Miss Clive greeted her kindly, but he was unaware of what was about to happen. In the face of the ignorant woman's gaze, she asked, "How can I help?" As she said this, the uninterested woman's face turned sour. Clearly, the woman did not like Clive. Was the look on her face due to his age? The clothes he was wearing weren't the sharpest, but they were for work. Why did she have a problem? However, it was the girl's next statement that left Clive feeling dejected. This kind of environment was familiar to him, but he had lowered his guard. Seeing the old man, the woman shook her head and said, "I cannot serve you, sir. You should leave," but her words hurt like a dagger. Standing there, he was awestruck. Why did she deny him service? He would find a way to repay her ignorance once he learned the truth. The events that were unfolding were beyond Clive's comprehension. The only thing they did was add insult to injury. His only desire was to eat his favorite burger. In spite of everything he had been through, he was denied that right. There had already been enough suffering for him. What was the purpose of this? His demeanor seemed to be misinterpreted as threatening, despite only looking for answers. As a result, the situation only worsened. Even after the fast food worker informed him that security had been called, Clive still didn't understand what was happening. With a baton in his hand, a man entered the establishment. It was unbelievable to Clive. There was no choice but to surrender. A feeling of his old training flooded him, but he fought it. It was still important for him to know why he was being treated this way. And in response to the security guard's approach, Clive's heart raced. In an attempt to suppress the instinct to defend himself, he recalled his time in the army. Although the situation was indignant, he knew he must remain calm. As a matter of fact, it wasn't the first time he'd been treated unfairly. As a veteran, he accepted it as part of the territory. Despite his baton still in hand, the guard gently but sternly said, "Sir, I am sorry, but you need to leave immediately." With his eyes fixed on the fast food worker named Rebecca, Clive raised his hands in surrender. No matter what it takes, he will get answers to why they are treating him in this way. Despite feeling a little sorry for himself, the security guard was just going about his duties. In frustration, Clive begged, "Tell me why. What is wrong with my necklace?" He couldn't figure out how his necklace was so offensive and why he had done something wrong. In a moment of apparent conflict, Rebecca hesitated. Her actions left her feeling both ashamed and defiant. Despite this, she stuck to her decision. He had to leave. Clive's confusion intensified. His fingers traced the intricate design on the pendant as he clutched it around his neck. As a symbol of bravery and sacrifice, it was a keepsake from his time in Vietnam. She could not understand its significance. How could she? He wore the necklace as a symbol of his sacrifice to his country. It made him proud. It was the only thing he had left of value, and now it offended people? In a world where youngsters don't understand what their elders sacrificed for them to be where they are, what had happened? Clive wished he could explain everything to everyone so they could understand. The only thing Clive wanted to know was why he had been asked to leave. He desperately needed a meal, so why wouldn't they serve it to him? Despite his pleadings, the fast food worker refused to explain why. His gaze caught her attention. "Rebecca, I don't understand what you're doing," the old man said through tears. "It's your necklace," she replied simply. "You cannot wear that in here." Clive examined the pendant he wore around his neck. In spite of wearing it for nearly 40 years, it now appears to be a problem. Anger surged through him. Despite its importance, she didn't even understand it. The only option he had was to let security escort him out. He wasn't done with her or the restaurant yet. His real identity would be revealed to them. Clive had already made up his mind about what he was going to do the next day. They needed to know who they were dealing with. The old uniform was dusted off and he put it on. As a result of her ignorance, he would make her pay. Once he returned to the establishment, she would know who she was dealing with. Now, it wasn't just about the burger. His necklace remained on as he returned to the store. In shock, the security guard stood back. Knowing who he was dealing with, he didn't bar Clive from entering. He turned to the counter when he walked through the doors. She was just as distracted as usual. It was Clive's 2 words that made her beg for forgiveness, however. Now that she had seen the uniform, the woman was a shell of herself. She must have realized it all at once. All the reasons behind the necklace now made sense, and she apologized. She wasn't going to get off easy with Clive. Despite her offer to order him the burger from yesterday, he declined. He no longer wanted it. The only thing he wanted to clarify was one thing. As a result, Clive felt pity for her at that point. Even though he saw the embarrassment on her face, he hadn't received an explanation for what had happened. While trying to quell the storm of emotions raging inside him, Clive took a deep breath. He knew he wouldn't help himself or anyone else by getting angry now. "Rebecca, I need you to understand why I cherish my necklace so much," he said slowly. Clive had become the focus of the security guard's gaze, and even the restaurant had fallen silent. Rebecca nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Softly, she replied, "I'm listening." Clive recounted the horrors he and his fellow soldiers had witnessed, the sacrifices they had made, and the camaraderie they shared during their time in Vietnam. As he spoke, the pendant around his neck grew heavier in meaning as he painted a vivid picture of his past. Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she listened to Clive's story. She realized the insensitivity of her actions and the ignorance of her initial judgment. She had unknowingly belittled a hero, a man who had given so much for his country. "I really appreciate what you have done for this country, sir," she tearfully replied. As Clive finished his story, he looked around at the other patrons in the restaurant, many of whom had also been listening intently. The atmosphere had shifted from one of tension to one of deep respect and understanding. It was a lesson learned for everyone that day. A lesson in the power of empathy and the importance of recognizing the sacrifices of those who had served. People got up from their seats and came forward to shake his hand and thank him for his service. They commended him for his bravery in fighting for their country and making it back home. Rebecca knew she had made the wrong decision by asking Clive to leave. There was only one thing left for her to do: He leaned across the countertop, looked the girl directly in the eye, and said, "Rebecca, you need to understand. I'm a disabled veteran. I fought for this country, and I don't appreciate you kicking me out for something as silly as a necklace." The girl looked up, and all she had to say was, "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were a veteran. I made a mistake." But Clive was only just getting started. Clive tried spreading a little bit of awareness in the restaurant. If he could just teach Rebecca to never turn her nose up at someone again, then he would be satisfied. But why had she refused him service? He could make an educated guess, but he wanted to know for sure why the necklace had set her off. He decided to ask for the truth. "So tell me, Rebecca, why did you kick me out because of my necklace? Why did my uniform convince you when my necklace seemed to offend you?" the veteran asked in a low tone. "Well, I saw the necklace and just assumed that it was a fashion statement. I never took it seriously and, in a lapse of judgment, kicked you out," the girl said, fighting back tears. The girl seemed sorry, and now Clive understood her decision-making. She thought that his dog tags were stolen valor and wanted him to leave because he was impersonating a real veteran. But now that she knew he was a disabled veteran for real, she was more than happy to make amends. Now that she had learned her lesson, Clive had one last request for her. Clive looked at the girl, and for the first time, his scowl turned into a smirk. He then said, "Well, now that everything has been cleared up, how about I get the one thing that's been long overdue?" The girl stared at him for a moment before she realized what he was talking about. She quickly rang up the order and told him to wait at a table. Clive patiently sat at a table before the girl brought the burger to him herself. The diner was just as empty as the previous day, but he couldn't understand why. He bit into the burger and was transported to heaven. The succulent burger was definitely worth the wait. But there was one more surprise in store for Clive that he didn't expect. After finishing the burger, Clive sat up and walked back to the counter. He told Rebecca to give his compliments to the chef before pulling out his torn and weathered wallet. But the girl stopped him. "It's already been paid for," she said with a genuine smile. Clive stared around before locking eyes with the security guard. He gave Clive a thumbs up. He'd quickly become a regular and gained 2 new friends. Clive left the fast food restaurant that day with a full stomach and a heart warmed by the unexpected turn of events. As he walked back to his apartment, he couldn't help but reflect on the power of understanding and forgiveness. He was proud of the fact that he could educate some people and still hold on to his dignity. Over the next few weeks, Clive became a regular at the burger place. The employees knew him by name, and he often shared stories with them about his time in the military. It became a place where veterans and civilians alike could gather and bond over good food and shared experiences. Oftentimes, he would share a meal with Joe, the security guard. One day, as Clive was enjoying his burger, he noticed a familiar face at a nearby table. It was Rebecca, the same worker who had initially denied him service. She had tears in her eyes as she approached him. "I wanted to apologize again, Mr. Thompson," Rebecca said. "I was so wrong about your necklace and what it represents. Thank you for educating me and giving me a second chance." Clive smiled warmly and gave her a hug. "Apology accepted, Rebecca. It's never too late to learn and grow. And thank you for being open to understanding. That's all I ever wanted." Over time, Rebecca, Clive, and Joe became very close, and there wasn't a day that went by that Clive did not engage with them whenever he visited the fast food restaurant. Clive's story didn't end with the misunderstanding at the fast food restaurant. Over time, he became a local hero, not for his military service alone, but for his ability to bridge gaps and foster understanding among people from all walks of life. And as for his long-awaited pension, with the support of his newfound community, he and his fellow veteran friends finally received the recognition and benefits they deserved for their years of sacrifice.